Hey Edwin, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. How about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited because we are recording this at the beginning of November, and you know what that means?
Yeah, it's almost November 9th, and that will be the release date of .NET 6. So yeah, I'm also
Exactly.
pretty excited about it.
Yeah, and actually, by the time that you are watching this at home, it probably already is released. But
Probably, yeah.
and I hear there are a lot of new features in there, right?
Yeah, way too many to, show you in one .NetFlix. So we're actually going to do a little mini series. I'm going to do part one, and then our colleague Simon van der Meer is going to do part two, and I will show you what's in both of these parts. But yeah, those are two episodes of .NetFlix, and then still we haven't shown you all the new features in .NET 6. So
All right.
yeah, bear with us. But I'm going to show you yeah, some of the cool features that's coming in .NET 6.
Yeah, sounds great. So, what are the topics that we are going to look at specifically today?
Yeah, let me share my screen and show you some slides to introduce that. So this is an overview of part one and two. I'm going to do a general introduction of .NET 6, and then we're going to look at C# 10 language features and features in ASP.NET Core 6, and also some updates in the tooling that we will get in .NET 6. And then afterwards in part two, Simon is going to look at new features in the .NET base class library. So let's dive in. If you look at the new features and improvements in .NET 6, they were based on a couple of themes, and I've shown them here on the slides. But basically, you can have three main topics here. And the first one is improvement in productivity for existing developers, lowering the threshold for new developers coming into C# and .NET. And the last one is performance improvements of .NET itself. So if we look at .NET 6, it's supposed to be a unified stack. And what does that mean? Well, basically, you can build any application that you want with .NET 6. So whether you're building a mobile application for a phone, or you're building a game, or you're building a web application or a desktop application, .NET is the way to go. So if we look at the evolution of .NET, here you can see a timeline of all the versions of .NET that we had before and that will come after .NET 6. And then on November 9th is the official release date for .NET 6, and that will be done during .NET Conf, which is an online conference, and that will show you all the new features in .NET. Another important thing is that from now on, every year we will have a major release of .NET, and every other year we will have an LTS release, and .NET 6 is also an LTS release. And what does that mean? It is a long-term supported release. So it is basically meant for running production workloads. So let's dive in and look at some C# 10 language features, because in .NET 6 we will get C# 10, and it shows you a lot of new features here on the slide. And we will go over them in a small demo that I've created, and we will actually dive into the code. There's also some features that didn't make it into C# 10, and I will also show you what those are.
So Edwin, those features that didn't make it into C# 10, are they still on the list for C# 11?
Yes, they definitely are. So in the next version, they will be added, and you can actually follow this online, because on GitHub, you can actually find the issues for these individual features, and then you can see all the discussions around them between the team and the community, and you can actually also see what's on the roadmap for the next versions of C#. So they will be coming up in the later version. So let me go over to Visual Studio Code. And in here, I have a .NET 6 application that is featuring some C# 10 features. So first of all, let's look at the CS_proj file. So what you can see in here, that this is a console application. It will output an executable. This is not something new, but you see that the target framework here is .NET 6, and that we're actually using the language versions 10. So that means that we can use the C# 10 features. So let's open up the program file. And this is a little bit different than what we're used to when we're building .NET applications. So there's no program class and there's no main method here. But you can just type statements into this file, and they will actually be compiled and you can run them. So this will save you a lot of typing, a lot of indentations, because there's also no namespace here, and you can just start typing these statements in here. And just to show you that this actually works, I will start the application now. So I'm going to do a .NET run in this folder. And then you're going to see a little menu. And these are the demos that I will be using to show you all of the C# 10 features later on. But this actually compiles and it runs. So yeah, this is really compact and there's not a lot of ceremony in here. And this is also one of these themes that I was talking about for people coming into C# newly. Yeah, this is really easy to get started. You don't need to know about namespaces. You don't need to know about program class or arguments and all that stuff. You will learn that later, obviously, because it's still good to know that. But for now, you can just start typing, and that will make the threshold for learning C# a little bit lower. So let me dive into some of the new features. One of the new features in C# 10 is global usings, which is actually pretty cool. So if you can remember from C# files that you wrote, well, yesterday, basically, before .NET came out, you had to add using statements on the top of each of your files. And then all the stuff that you were using in that file, you needed to have using statements for all the classes that you were using. Now what you can do in C# 10 is that you can create one file, and then you can make global using statements. And that means that every global using statements will make the classes in that namespace available to all the files within this project. So, and that will also save you a lot of ceremony and make your files a lot cleaner. So if we go into a couple of the new features, then we will start with some small features here. So what is available in C# 10 is create constant strings using string interpolation. So I'm using a couple of const strings here, and then I create a constant string by using string interpolation, and that actually works now. So if I go back to the demo, and it's not a real spectacular demo, but if I choose number 3, you can actually see that the code that I wrote here, it writes this constant string onto the console, and that works like a charm. Another feature that I want to show you is that we can now use record structs. So we already had records in C# 9, but now you can actually create a record as a struct. And this will mean that it has all the features of a record, but it will actually be allocated on the stack and not on the heap. Some other new feature with particularly for records is that now you can seal the ToString implementation. So a record has by default a ToString implementation that will show you all the properties of this record. You can override that. That is not a new feature, but now you're able to seal this implementation. So what you can see here, I have a customer record that has a name, an address, an age, and an email. And then here I have a gold customer record that inherits from the customer record. And it has an additional property, loyalty points. And then I could override the ToString here, but in this case, I'm not possible to do that because I've sealed this ToString implementation. So if I create an instance of the customer and write it to the console, and then an instance of the gold customer and write it to the console, and I will show you the demo now, then actually you will see that both of these records will use the same implementation from the base. And you don't see any loyalty points here for the gold customer. Then look at a feature that is pretty useful. So what is possible in C# 10 is that you can do a different way of using the property pattern when you do pattern matching. So what you can see here in this demo is I have a point record with an x and a y coordinate, and I have a vector record that is built up of 2 points. And then what I've created here is an is_on_y_axis method that will give you back whether or not this vector touches the y-axis. So either for the start point, the x must be 0, or for the end point, the x must be 0. And formally, when you wanted to write this, you have to do it like this. So if you have an object which has a nested object in it, then you have to create this anonymous type for every object. And that is a lot of curly braces in there. So now in C# 10, what you can do is you can actually use a point to designate the inner object. So this will actually be the same as this one. And that will save you a lot of curly braces. And I think this is also a more compact, but also a clearer way to express this So that's pretty awesome. So to show you that it works, I'm using this is on y-axis x implementation. So if I use that, then you can actually see that it works because this vector touches the y-axis. Then there's another feature. So here you can see a tuple with 3 properties, name, price, and stock. Then formally you had to specify or declare all these properties before you use them in the assignment. So in this case, the query product data will give me back a tuple with a string, a double, and an int. And now what I can do in C#10, I can actually use already declared properties here, or variables, I should say. And then I can introduce a new variable here in stock, and it will automatically declare and assign the value. From then on, I can just use it as it was declared separately. So let me show you the demo. You can see that actually I can call this, and then both times I call query product data, I actually get some product data back, and all the variables have been filled in. Then let's look at these features that I've talked about that didn't make it into C#10. So I've created a little declaration around it, so this will not actually compile. But one of the features that will probably be in C#11 is required keyword for properties. So the cool thing here is that if you declare a property like this, name, and you give it a getter and an init setter, this means that I can always get the value for this property, but I can only initialize the value in an object initializer or in a constructor, obviously. Well, the cool thing about this required keyword is that it will guard you to make sure that the name property always has a value, either through the constructor or through the object initializer. Another very cool feature, in my opinion, is the field accessor. So we've all been there that we have, for instance, an email address, and most of the time we have something like this, right? So we only have a getter and an initializer, or a setter, maybe. And then once you realize that you need to do something specific when setting this value, in this case, maybe doing it to lower and trimming some of the spaces from the beginning and from the end, then you actually have to create a backing field and then write a getter and a setter, or an init part for this backing field. Well, in the next version of C#, you will be able to do something like this. So you will have a field accessor here that will actually access the generated backing field for you. So you don't need to specify an explicit backing field within your class or in your record. And then finally, automatic null checking for parameters. So this is a very cool syntax. You can say, okay, I need a string file name here. And when you if you add these 2 exclamation marks after the file name, then automatically a null check will be done on this parameter. And yeah, there will be an exception thrown if it is nil. So you don't have to write these null checks anymore yourself. You can just add these 2 exclamation marks. So again, this is pretty compact and will save you a lot of typing. So that concludes our overview of the new features in C#10. So let's dive into the new features in ASP.NET Core 6. So if we look at the list of features in ASP.NET Core, it's a very long list. I've shown a couple here on the slides, and I'm going to look at the top ones here. But the whole list under other, I will not be looking at. And that is not even all the features in ASP.NET Core 6. So I always recommend that you dive into the documentation because everything is documented, but it's a lot out there. So there's also a list of all the breaking changes in .NET 6 because there are a couple. Always make sure that you check that list when you start upgrading, obviously. But let's look at some new features in ASP.NET Core 6. So I'm going to go over to my other Visual Studio Code. And here I have an ASP.NET Core 6 Web API project. And again, I'm going to show you here what's in the CS profile. It's basically the same thing. I'm targeting .NET 6, but now I'm using, this is a web project, obviously, and I'm using C#10 again. And then already there's a really cool new feature in ASP.NET Core, which is implicit usings. And I've enabled it here, so it's an opt-in model. But what this means is that if I say implicit usings enable, it will basically add using statements to most of the common classes that you use in ASP.NET. So a lot of them are, and there's a list in the documentation, which classes are, or which namespaces basically are automatically used. But this is really nice because it again save you a couple of lines within your files, and it will save you a lot of typing. So let us look at the program CS. And if you look at this file, again, this is top-level statements. So I don't have a namespace. I don't have anything in here. I just can start typing. And also, what you don't see here is a startup class, because what we're used to with ASP.NET Core 5 and before, you had a startup class that basically had your configure services and your configure method and all that stuff. Well, now with ASP.NET Core 6, you can do what they call minimal API. And this is, I think, a very cool new way of writing APIs. And it is really compact. And I will walk you through this file and show you how you can build an entire API basically with this piece of code. So when we start up top, we have here a builder. We create a web application builder here. And that is something that we have to do in order to register our services. This is basically dependency injection. And this builder has this iServices collection that we can use to register all our classes for dependency injection. In this case, I'm using an iPerson repo with an in-memory person repo implementation. By the way, this project is a very simple application for uploading a person. So it's kind of a Rolodex. You can upload a person and you can get the person by ID. It's not very exciting functionality-wise, but it's more about the new features in ASP.NET Core. Also, I can use add authorization. So a lot of the stuff that we did before with ASP.NET Core, we did it in our startup class. We're still doing it here, but now we use this builder, and then there we can use all kinds of features from ASP.NET Core. Then we're going to say app is builder.build, and then we have a web application. And then we can start setting it up. So here you can see one of the features that we already had in former versions of ASP.NET Core. If we're in development mode, we want to have some more details on our exception page. We can use HTTPS redirection. We can use authorization. That's all pretty much the same as we know from ASP.NET Core 5 and before. And then it will be a little bit different because most of the time, for instance, when you started using ASP.NET Core MVC, then you would have something like map controllers or something like that. And then you used ASP.NET Core controllers, web API controllers, to build your APIs. And then you have those attributes, right? Like, and I can show you an example here. There is a controller in here, but that is not used. But this is what you're more used to. So this is in the MVC namespace. And you have this API controller attribute. And you can specify the routes for your controller and for your individual methods. Well, there's a new way with the minimal API, because now you can do it like this. On this app object, you have a map post, but there's a lot of map methods here for defining your routes. And in this case, I'm creating a post operation on the URL /API/person. This is an async operation, and then I can specify the input for this method. And if you think back at the former version of ASP.NET Core, then this iPerson repo is injected by dependency injection, but this is not a constructor. So I'm just calling a Lambda expression here. Also, I don't have to specify from services, for instance, because that is what we did formerly. We had to specify from services, and then it was automatically injected. Well, with minimal APIs, you don't need to do that. You can just specify the types that you need, and then ASP.NET Core 6 will figure out what's happening here. So it will figure out that this repository will be injected using dependency injection, and this person is probably the object that you are passing into this post operation. So there's a lot figured out for you. And then within this Lambda expression, I can just write my code that needs to happen. So in this case, I'm calling the repository, and I'm adding this person that was passed in. I'm adding that to the database. In this case, it's in memory, but bear with me, it's a demo. And then I can return results that created that route. And this is something new, because this method will return an iResults instance. And for creating this iResult, there is a results helper class that is available to you, and it has, for instance, a created a route, but it also has an, let me show you, it has bad request, or an accepted, or an okay, or so this will actually create an HTTP result with an HTTP status code. And in this case, I want to have a created at route, just as we did in ASP.NET Core before. And then I can specify the name of the route at which this instance that I just uploaded can be retrieved. And then I can specify the ID of the person, which I can use to retrieve it, and then specify the object that I created. And this name is the name of this operation. So this is the map get. This is the get operation on this API. And you can also see, for instance, that this was added to the minimal API spec. So now I can say, if I have a route for a get operation on this URL, I want it to have the name get by ID. And formally, this was deduced from the name of the method, for instance. But now you can specify the name of the operation, and then you can use it in these kinds of results. So that's pretty cool. And then we've already touched on that a little bit. Here you see the map get, and in the URL, you also see that I can use these variables that will automatically be populated when I call this API. And again, this is injected in using dependency injection, and this will be passed in because I specified that in this URL. This is basically the same as with ASP.NET Core Web API before. And then in this case, I'm just getting the person from my repository. If I can't find it by ID, I will give it a not found, so a 404. And in another case, I will just give it a HTTP status result 200 OK and give back the person. And then once I've set up all these routes, I can just say, start my web application. So let's do that now. I am in this folder and I can just run this. And then you won't see anything new. This is just the same as you saw before. And then what I've done, I've created a little HTTP request here. So I'm going to do a post on /API/person. I'm running on localhost 5000. I'm using HTTP in this case. I'm passing in some JSON. I'm passing in some cool request header. I felt like it because ASP.NET 6 rules definitely. And then I pass in this person record. And when I call this API now, you can actually see that here you see some logging, which I emit from my repository that I've inserted a person with some data. And you can actually see that I have now a 201 created with a location. So this is the created at, and it automatically calculated the URL where this instance can be retrieved from. So if I take this ID and I do the get request with the right ID, send request, I actually see here that it was retrieved from my repository and I get the data back. So pretty simple API. It works like a charm. So I actually was able to build an entire working API with a post and a get in this, well, what is it? In 35 lines of C# code. And then if you leave out the comments, it's even less. So this is pretty terse. This is pretty compact, and it doesn't have a lot of ceremony. And that's, in my opinion, really cool if you want to build these kinds of simple APIs.
Yeah, that looks really great, Edwin. So if you've got an existing code base, you can still use the older controller model, right?
Exactly, yes. So what you can do is a couple of things. So here I've specified the code that needs to run in the Lambda expression. But I could obviously also create an API. So here I've created one before. So the get by ID, and then I can use this API by calling it from this Lambda expression, right? So I don't have to have the code in my program CS, because this was one of the things that the community was really critical about, because you obviously, if you create an API with 20 operations, you don't want to have all that code in your program CS file, because this will create a huge file and that's not maintainable anymore. So you can either inject a class and then call this class here instead of actually having the code. But what you can also do is, if I take this code and I put it in comments and I'll just say use controllers, So map controllers, just as we did with ASP.NET MVC before. And then I also have to do add controllers here. So add controllers to make sure that my controllers are registered, and then map controllers to make sure that all the routes are available. And then this controller that I already showed you, which is just an existing controller that I got from another ASP.NET Core 5 project, this also works. So when I now run the application, so I'm going to stop it and run it again, but now with the controller, you will see the exact same behavior. So let me call this API. Here we go. Oh, there's a validation error here. Oh yeah, this is something that you run into, because now we are using ASP.NET Core MVC. And what does ASP.NET Core MVC do out of the box for us is model binding and validation. So actually what happens here is that I pass in, let me close this for it. I pass in a person here, but the person needs to have an ID because it was defined as this. This is struct, and I need to identify, or I need to initialize this ID because I have nullable enabled in this project. So what you can see now is that's exactly the error message that we get. There's a validation error. The ID field is required. So this is something that you get for free when using a controller with MVC, so the model binding and all that stuff. But if you don't need that, it is also more optimized. So if I go back to the old way that I've had before, so not using controllers, but just specifying my API operations here, this lacks model validation. So that's something that you need to take into consideration when you start working with these minimal APIs. Now, there is a way, obviously, to add validation. So the .NET team has a lot of stuff out on GitHub and all kinds of documentation on how to do that. So it is possible. But these are the things you need. That is basically the trade-off. Do you need model validation for free, or do you want to have a fast and very compact API? So you have to be aware of that. Okay, so let's look at a couple other awesome features. So one of the things that they added is Swagger support. So just as we did before, I can go in here and then register Swagger. So I can say builder.services and enable my endpoints API Explorer. This is basically for Swagger to be able to show you this cool testing UI later on. And I will define here that I need Swagger generation. So this will generate the Swagger, so what's called the Open API spec for me, which contains all the information for calling this API. And then once I have done that, and I've also said that I want to use Swagger here, and I want to use this Swagger UI on a certain endpoint. Basically, this is the same that we did before in our startup class. If we now restart our application, and we would browse to the localhost 5001, in this case https://swagger, you will actually see the API Swagger UI that I can use to test this application. So that works exactly the same as with the former version of ASP.NET Core. So let me stop this application again. So that is pretty cool stuff, because that's basically what you always need. You want to have some way of describing your API, whether it's minimal or not. Then another cool feature that they added was HTTP logging. So what I can do here, I can add this to the builder. And in this case, I say add HTTP logging, and then there's a lot of features or a lot of options that you can configure. So in this case, I'm saying that I want all the fields in the request and the responses to be logged. I want explicitly, I showed you this my request header that I added. If I don't specify the header here, it will not be shown in the logging. But if I do specify it, this header will be included in the logging. I want the location response header. Well, all kinds of stuff you can configure here. And then once you have configured that, you have to specify that you actually want to use it in your web application. So I'm going to use HTTP logging. And then now when we start the application again, and we're going to do the request, you actually see a lot of logging here. So you can see that this comes from Microsoft ASP.NET Core HTTP logging middleware, and you see a lot of cool information. So this is a request, what is the protocol, what is the method, what is the scheme, all kinds of information. Also, my request header, ASP.NET Core 6 rules. So you can get all kinds of information, even the body of the message. And again, that's all configurable if you want that or not. But you can get a lot of information here from the HTTP logging. So that's a pretty cool feature. So let me stop this again. And then finally, staying on the topic of logging, the last thing I want to show you is W3C logging. So this is a standard format for web applications or web servers, basically. And what you can do, you can specify here a couple of options. And in this case, I want the log directory to just be a W3C logs folder within my project. So we will see that appearing in a moment. And then you can also specify which of the fields you want logged. And then once I've registered that, I also have to say that I want to use that. It's pretty much the same pattern. And now when I restart the application and do a request, we actually get W3C logging, which is also pretty gnarly. So let me do a request here. Here we go. And now you can actually see this file appearing here, this folder. And you see this is WC3 logging. So I can get all kinds of information from all the requests that come into the server. Pretty cool, I guess. So with that, that was all I wanted to show you. But again, there's lots of new features. As you can see here, HTTP 3 support. There's lots of new stuff for building Blazor applications. Lots of improvements for SignalR. There's too much to go through in this session. So please refer to the documentation and read up on .NET 6. Then finally, there are some updates on the tooling. Yeah, obviously we have Microsoft Visual Studio 2022. It's a 64-bit version. So you can try this out. It's pretty cool stuff. Then there's another cool feature. You will probably have a couple of versions of the .NET SDK and runtimes on your machine. Well, now with .NET 6, the .NET 6 CLI, you can have a command which is called .NET SDK check. And if you execute that command, it will look at your machine, what kind of SDKs you have installed and what runtimes you have installed. And it will show you whether or not there is a newer version for those versions available. So if you can see in the example here, I have, for instance, the SDK 3.1.404, but there's actually a 3.1.412 patch available. And also here you can see that I have still a preview of .NET 6 on my machine. And then the former version, if you don't have the last version installed, it will actually show you that there's an update available. And it does the same for your runtimes, as you can see here. This is 2.1.28 and 2.1.29 is available. At this moment in time, I think it's not possible yet to also say .NET SDK update or something like that. But at least now you can get a clear overview of the version that you have on your machine and whether or not there are any new versions available. So that's pretty cool. And then finally, what is really important to know is that I've shown you these minimal API stuff and these top-level statements. Well, all the templates that you use when you're using .NET New command from the .NET CLI, they will use all these new C# language features. So you see an example here that if you now do a .NET New console with .NET 6, this is actually what you get. So you get one command line and one console.write line. And this actually compiles and runs. So that's a lot less than what we used to have with the entire program file, the program class, the main method, and all that stuff. So it's a lot less stuff you need to write in order to have a running application. And then finally, you can now also search within all these templates. So you can, for instance, say, okay, I want to search for a package or a template with console in the name. Or I want to search for all the templates in the package SOFON, because you can package multiple templates together in a package. Or you can use, for instance, also on the author of the package. So that's pretty cool. And you can just do that from the command line, from the .NET CLI. So that's pretty cool stuff. So, Sander, that's all I had to show you for today. Did you enjoy that?
I did. Thank you so much for showing us all these cool features. And there's more to come, right? Because we didn't
Yeah.
look at the base class library even. So in the next episode, Simon will take us through that as well, and we'll have a close look. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.